Well, a 70-cent increase in the minimum wage takes effect today, and with us this morning to tell us about the impact is Linda Barrington, Research Director and Labor Economist at the Conference Board. And Linda, thanks so much for joining us on this. A pretty big increase this time around, 70 cents. But is obviously, right now we're in a recession. Is now the right time to be doing this?
Well, I think that's the question. I mean, the impact of raising the minimum wage on employment is an ongoing debate among the academic economists. You've got neoclassical economists who say anytime you raise a price artificially high, you get surplus. That means unemployment. The empirical research, though, is pretty mixed. I mean, some consensus that there's a slight negative impact. But I think in a recession at this time, as we're looking at competitiveness, this may not be where we need to put our energy in terms of really saying what's the most important thing long-term to be focusing on.
Well, in the past, though, in other cycles, I mean, it hasn't made much difference in the unemployment rate, for instance.
Well, it hasn't. But also the research, the best and most recent research has all been done in an upswing. So when we look at who the minimum wage impacts the most, 16 to 24-year-olds in the labor force, about 10% of those are at or below minimum wage. So it's disproportionately on younger workers that this is going to play out. Workers over the age of 25, less than 2% are at or below the federal minimum wage. You have differences by state, but it's really not affecting a large part of the workforce.
So that might mitigate the impact then, because
Absolutely.
Younger workers are, I mean, they're important, but they're also very flexible at that point.
Right. Now, from the younger workers' perspective, they're already being hit very hard by this. So the unemployment rates between 16 and 19-year-olds are over 24%. So they're already, feeling the impact of this. So that's from the young workers' perspective. I think from the employer's perspective, the question is really, how do you raise the productivity of workers to cover those costs? And this rise in minimum wage is not the only cost. We've got healthcare costs and general cost of living.
So how do they do that? How do they raise the productivity?
Well, it really comes back to skills, and I think this is where the Conference Board research that was just cited by Obama's Council of Economic Advisors really comes into play. You've got employers. Over 33% of our employers on that survey said that new entrants to the workforce with just a high school degree are deficiently prepared. So if you've got that kind of skill gap, and then you say, how can we compete internationally? That's really where we need to be focused. How do we improve workplace training? How do we improve the skills of workers as jobs become less and less routine, less and less manual, more and more abstract tasks are required, critical thinking? Those are the kind of skills that employers are saying really add value to cover the productivity costs, but
they're not getting covered for it.
Them.
So then that, of course, then brings in the argument or brings in the case for employers to go overseas for that type of skill then.
In the long run, yeah, because you've got not only sort of the cost of wages in the U.S. versus other countries, but how productive can U.S. workers be? And on average, we're still very productive, which is why we can sustain the higher level of costs that we have.
Linda, I mean, in this recession cycle at least, can you fathom a guess as to which industries would be most affected by this increase and which would be least effective?
Right. Well, and you guys have mentioned some of them. It's the service sectors, right? It's the restaurants, entertainment, hotels, hospitality, anyone who's got a large percent of their labor force as lower wage workers. So it's certainly hitting industries differently. It's hitting states differently. A lot of states actually have minimum wages that are higher than this federal. So in some cases, it's going to not even apply to certain workforces.
And how can we apply this increase, this 70-cent jump increase, to the other increases we've seen in other I guess, job categories where their own wages have increased? I mean, is it on pace or no?
Well, I think that in general we've seen a real slowdown in compensation increases. So we've got employers who are reporting that their salary increase budgets, how much they think their total compensation on salary is actually going to be shrinking a little bit. So it is counter to that. But from the Conference Board's perspective, we really don't have concerns about inflationary pressures for the next 12 to 18 months. And again, because the minimum wage impacts such a small percent of the total labor force, we really don't think it's going to contribute in an inflationary way at all during this current downturn.
Or even much to the unemployment rate at all. Okay, Linda, thank you so much for joining us and giving us some perspective on the minimum wage increase. Linda Barrington of the Conference Board.